Good afternoon, families. My name is Heather Deer, and I'm the Assistant Director of Parent and Family Programs. Welcome to this Thursday edition of our Family Friday Summer Series. Today, we're going to be talking about academic advising and course registration. Welcome. There are about 330 of you all here, in case you were curious, so this seems to be a popular topic. Just a reminder, if this is your first Family Friday session, we are going to introduce the topic, which is academic advising and course registration. We have the Associate Director of Academic Advising, Shelly Lorenzo, here with us. Thank you, Shelly. She's going to spend some time introducing this topic, covering some critical ground information that you may have questions about, so we can get those out of the way. And then we'll spend the bulk of our time answering your questions. So you will ask your questions using the Q&A feature here in Zoom. You can find that at the bottom of your screen labeled Q&A. If you have those burning questions, feel free to ask those questions throughout the duration of our program starting now. We will answer as many questions as we have time for. I have some helpers behind the scenes who will be doing their best to answer all of your questions. Please note that if we are unable to answer your question, you can always send us an email at families@wm.edu. We're more than happy to help. I also noticed that there are quite a few students on the call today. Please note that this session is for parents and family members. And so while we will be answering questions directly about the student experience, it may be helpful for your student to reach out to student transition engagement programs or some of the resources that we will be discussing today that Shelly will mention. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Shelly, who will carry us through a short presentation before we get to that Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Heather. I'm really excited to be here for a Family Friday on a Thursday to talk through some of these pieces with you all and with you all about the registration process. So I have a very short, quick, sweet little presentation just to hit some of the big highlights about our process of registration for incoming students. Heather, I'm going to ask the awkward Zoom question. Can you see my screen? Awesome. Thank you. So again, as Heather mentioned, my name is Shelly Lorenzo. I am the Associate Director in the Office of Academic Advising. And the intention, as I understand it for our time together today, is to talk a little bit about what fall registration looks like for our incoming students. So the first thing that I want to talk about, I've got too many. Sorry, guys. There we go. Too many screens. The first thing I want to talk about is how we prepare students for registration, right? We don't send students in there blindly to register for their classes. There is a process through which we educate students about our curriculum and about the registration process. So at William & Mary, we use an online short course called College Studies. It's through our Blackboard site, which is our learning management system. It's taught by peer advisors, so it is taught by student leaders who volunteer their time in the summer to try to help students get up to speed on academics at William & Mary. Part 1 is focused all on academic advising. So we start really big picture. What is the liberal arts and sciences curriculum? We talk through what our general education requirements are here at William & Mary. We call them the COLL curriculum, college curriculum, COLL curriculum, all the way down to the specifics. So what's the system we use to register for courses? How do you register for courses? How do you find courses? So again, in college studies, we cover all of that. So again, really big picture, what is the liberal arts and sciences curriculum, all the way down to the specifics. How do I actually register for a class? So we cover all of that in college studies. Part 2 is all about information literacy and library resources. So we want to make sure students are comfortable and confident as soon as they hit that first classroom, how to access the resources they need to be successful in that class, how to utilize the tools at Swim Library. So that's part 2, which is also very helpful, important, but obviously our focus today is on kind of part 1 and that academic advising piece. So we have 3 different versions of the college studies course. We have one version specific for transfers. That started back on June 1st. So as I mentioned, part 1 is focused just on that academic advising portion. So for our transfer students, they got access to the course on June 1st. Part 1 is due by June 22nd to allow them to complete in the first part of registration. So I'll get to that in a second, but I'm just focusing on college studies for now. And then part 2, that informational literacy piece is due July 31st. For our incoming freshman students, they will get access to the course soon, in a couple of weeks, end of the month. And we ask them to complete part 1 by July 9th. And then again, part 2 is due by July 31st. And then for our joint degree program students, they have the same timeline as our freshman students, but they have their own separate college studies course that is tailored specifically to the curricular needs of our joint degree program students. All of these courses, again, are taught by peer advisors. Those are student volunteers. And so every student enrolled in a college studies course will have their own peer advisor that is available to support them. That peer advisor will reach out regularly to students, but is also available for students to reach out to them. Instructions for students on how to reach out to their peer advisor is in college studies. So again, it's all built into this system. So we hope students take advantage of that. Again, the peer advisors are trained to help them. They're excited to do this for incoming students, and we really hope that students take advantage of that. Another reason that it's important for families to know the dates for these is these are kind of the timing windows to think about academic advising course registration questions. So I know a lot of families, as soon as their student is accepted, is really excited and starts to dive in. We don't want to discourage that excitement, but we do have a dedicated time to talk about this and to support students in this. So just know that STEP student transition engagement programs has this all very well choreographed and executed, where we are working kind of across the institution to support students as they're coming on board. And so again, kind of our time to talk to students about academic advising course registration is really within the window that college studies exists in. So we really encourage students to take advantage of the time that they have then. The next piece of the puzzle is the fall registration process. So fall registration is a 2-part process for our incoming students. Once a student has successfully completed part 1 of college studies, they then have a window where they can register for some of their fall classes, not all of their fall classes, just some of their fall classes. We want them to start actually building a schedule, but we also want them to start getting comfortable with the system that we use to register for courses, right? Like anything else, it takes time to figure it out and all the nuances there. So we want to build in some learning in the summer for students. So for our incoming transfer students, they have a window end of this month where they can start building their fall course schedule. And then for our freshman students, they have their window in July. So again, we try to coordinate these. They will be able to, during the summer registration window, register for some of their fall classes, not a complete schedule, but some of their fall classes. Then when they come to orientation in August, that's when they're going to have the opportunity to meet with their faculty advisor, talk to them about what they have registered for, what else they would like to register for, and then complete their fall schedule. So I really want to hone on this, especially for our families, to kind of support students through this. You're not going to build the perfect schedule in one day. It takes time. Number one, to complete a full schedule, it takes at least 2 times, right? We have our summer registration window and then our registration window in the fall. So it's going to take time out the gate. And then I also want to remind families, as you're supporting your students during this process, there's also an add drop window. So once our incoming students have their own windows just for them to build their schedule, we then have an add drop window where all of our students are getting back in the system and making adjustments to their schedules. And that goes all the way until the second Friday of classes. So students have until the second Friday of the semester to complete their schedule. So again, really trying to hone in. Students have time to build their schedule. They are not going to build their perfect schedule out the gate. They have time to build their schedule. We try to manage expectations in college studies, but I'm really hopeful that our families can help us manage expectations as well. They will build a schedule that allows them access to the courses they need to make timely progression. That will all happen. It's just not going to happen right away. It takes time for that to happen. The other thing that I like to remind families about is this faculty advisor piece. So again, students will be working with a peer advisor in the summer. That's a student volunteer who's trained to assist in college studies and in this first registration window. Students were also asked last month for some information about them to help us match them with a faculty advisor. So when they come to orientation, they will actually have the opportunity to meet with their faculty advisor and talk to them. And that faculty advisor will be a resource for them. So all of that to say is your student will have point people to support them. So yes, we have offices around that are available to support students, but especially when it comes to registration, they have point people that they can work with directly. So their peer advisor in college studies, and then they'll meet with their advisor at orientation. Lastly, I want to share some resources. So one resource, open course list, that's where you can actually see all the courses that will be offered this fall. So families, anyone can access it. It doesn't require login information or anything like that. So anyone can check out courselist.wm.edu and you can see what's being offered this fall. So that can be a helpful tool for students and for families to kind of poke around and see what is being offered on campus this fall. Another resource is our course catalog that has all of the policies and procedures and the curriculum spelled out for our students. So we go over that as part of college studies, but it might also be a helpful tool for families to check out or just know that it exists and how to find it if you need to. And then lastly, I want to share our office, the Office of Academic Advising. We also serve as a resource for students as they're going through this process. Our advising model here at William & Mary is a faculty advisor model. Like I mentioned, your students will be matched up with a faculty advisor, but we do have our own staff of professional advisors that are available to serve as kind of a backup and support. So your students have their peer advisor when they're in college studies to ask questions. Your students will have their pre-major advisor when they come to campus for orientation in August. And they also have access to the advisors in our office as well. So just making sure that folks understand that we provide a variety of supports for students kind of as they're coming on board and learning more about William & Mary and our curriculum and registration and all of those bits. So Heather, that's kind of my really short and sweet little presentation. So yeah, how do you want to take it from here?
Awesome. So if you want to go ahead and stop sharing, we'll get to the Q&A. Thank you, Shelley. I thought it was helpful for us to go ahead and go over some of that core information that families probably have questions about right out of the gate. And so I appreciate you taking the time to create that presentation for us. So we have about 15 open questions right now. Now is the time to go in and submit those questions that you may have following that presentation. We'll get to as many as we have time for. You might also notice that if you're asking questions and we're able to type an answer to your question, we're doing that as well. So keep an eye on that Q&A box if you don't hear your question being answered live here on the call. So I'm going to start with, when will the peer advisor connect with students and how will they go about connecting with students?
Sure. So you will hear this probably a million times from Heather's office, from STEP, from our office. Make sure your student regularly checks their William & Mary email. So on the first day that college studies opens for your student, their peer advisor will reach out to their William & Mary email address. And that's kind of our main way to communicate with students. So make sure that your student is checking their William & Mary email. And the first day that college studies opens is when they will receive an email from their peer advisor. So for our transfers, that would have already happened. And then for our freshmen, that'll happen on June 28th.
Awesome. Thank you. So when and how do students with dual enrollment and AP credits find out what transfers to their William & Mary record for credit, and how do they transfer that credit to William & Mary?
Sure. So I'm going to answer the second part first. The first thing that your student will want to do is make sure that they're, for AP, IBs, any tests that they've taken, to make sure that they send the test scores to William & Mary, to the registrar's office, for them to evaluate. And same thing with dual enrollment credit. So if your student has dual enrollment credit, make sure they send the final transcript to William & Mary. I know sometimes we have students that will take courses in the summer, which is fantastic. Just make sure that William & Mary gets that final transcript, because that's how we know that the student completed the course. Now, in terms of what will that count as here, when students go through college studies, they actually have an assignment where they look and see with their APs, IBs, dual enrollments, if they transfer, right? Because not everything will transfer. If they transfer, and if they do transfer, how do they transfer? Do they count as an elective, or do they fulfill a requirement? So again, when your student goes through college studies, they will actually work through all of those pieces, and they'll be able to see a version of their transcript that will have those pieces filled in, assuming that they are in fact bringing in credit.
Wonderful. Thank you. Speaking of those AP courses, are placement tests and AP courses the only way to place out of lower level courses? And how would that process work?
Sure. So they're for some students, if they are bringing in, again, dual enrollment credit, or if they're transfer students, bringing in college credit or through AP, IB exams, there are opportunities through those kind of avenues, if you will, to fulfill some of the lower level requirements for the COLL curriculum, our college curriculum. So proficiencies, some of our knowledge domain requirements, things like that. So those are kind of the mechanisms for that to take place. Students would have already done those as part of their high school or college experience, right? So there's nothing that would necessarily be taking place now that would fulfill any requirements. So what we're looking at is what they did in high school or their previous institution to fulfill requirements here. And students will, again, be able to identify that when they go through college studies.
Fabulous. So do COLL 110, 150, or intro classes generally fill up?
Great question. So for our all of our classes that we would consider kind of ideal courses for freshmen, our deans work to reserve seats in those classes specifically for our incoming students. So right now we have kicked our continuing students out of registration. Continuing students are no longer allowed to add, drop, swap, or do anything like that. And so that way we have a special window just for our transfers and then special window just for our freshmen to go in and add courses. And there are seats held specifically for our incoming students to make sure they have access to the courses they need to be successful in their first year. So yes, seats are held for students. Again, I will say students aren't going to build their perfect schedule right off the bat, right? It's going to take time. Maybe to get access to all the courses that they need, or again, even to build a full schedule. A student won't build a full schedule until orientation. So just kind of setting expectations there around that process. But we will make sure by the time the dust settles that students are in classes that are part of their progression towards their degree.
I have found that to be very true, that students are able to create their schedule and they're in classes and progression towards degree happens. I can say that confidently. Yeah. So a couple questions about the timing of registration. You covered this briefly in your presentation. I have one question. Is my son required to register for some classes during the summer, or is he able to register for all classes at orientation? And just a clarification of how many courses will they register for during the summer versus when they arrive at orientation?
Sure. So for our incoming transfer students, they'll be registering for up to 11 credit hours. During their summer registration window, they will be able to register for up to 11 credit hours. And then for our incoming freshmen, they will be able to register for up to 8 credit hours. So most courses in general are around 3 credit hours. So for our incoming transfer students, chances are they'll get into 3 courses. And then for our incoming freshmen, that'll be 2 courses. Again, there's some variation with labs and some of our arts courses are 1 credit. So there's always going to be a little bit of a wiggle there. But for our incoming transfer students during their summer registration window, they are capped at 11 credit hours. And then for our incoming freshmen, they're capped at 8 credit hours. When they come for orientation, the Monday of orientation is when they'll meet with their faculty advisor. And then that Monday night, they have a registration window where they can go up to 16 credit hours. Now, 12 is the minimum to be a full-time student. So that window on Monday night allows them to become a full-time student. They can go up to 16. And then when the add drop window starts, they can go up to 18. So those are kind of all the different variations along the way. Now, technically a student doesn't have to register for courses during that summer registration window, but we really do want students to get in there, register for at least 2 courses, right? And just to get comfortable with the system. Doesn't mean that those are the courses that they'll actually take this fall. Again, there can be lots of variations during these different registration windows. So Just because a student registers for 2 courses during the summer window doesn't mean those are the courses they'll ultimately end up with in the fall. Things can change. Students might swap for different things. But we do want students to go in there and get comfortable with our registration system.
My follow-up question was going to be, what if I change my mind in that
Yes.
class I was really excited about in the summer? I'm like kind of meh about when I come to orientation. So
Yeah.
there's flexibility there.
Yes. And that totally happens, right? You know, students might register for a class in the summer thinking this is their interest and this is what kind of speaks to them. And then fast forward to August and things change and they get to meet with their faculty advisor and something new sparks and they want to transition. There is time for students to make changes to their schedule. So yes, that's, and developmentally, that's very normal. It's very normal for students to want to adjust or change as they learn new information or they learn more about themselves.
How long or how much time does the college studies course take? Is that something they need to do individually? Are there designated times when they need to be online, so synchronous versus asynchronous? What does that Blackboard course look like?
That's a great question. So it is completely asynchronous. So students can complete it on their own time at their own pace. We intentionally give students a long window to complete it as we understand different responsibilities, work, that sort of thing can make it challenging. It typically takes students anywhere from 5 to 7 hours to complete it. But most of our students don't do it in one chunk like that, right? Most of our students might do it's all broken up into modules. So maybe they'll do like 2 modules here and then 2 modules there. So aggregate, it takes 5 to 7 hours to complete, but students can work at their own pace to complete it.
That's very helpful information. So for the joint degree program, college studies, is that for home students who will be at William & Mary for their first year, or is it for those who are coming to William & Mary from St. Andrews?
St. Andrews, great. It's for both. That's a great question. So our joint degree program, college studies, is designed for both our home students and our host students. And we try to define that in the first lesson to make it really clear when we're going through kind of what the differences are or how things might look slightly different for our home versus host students. But yes, both home and host students will complete the JDP college studies. And again, we try to tease apart within that how things might look a little bit different for different student groups.
So how many classes or credits are recommended during a student's first semester at William & Mary?
Great question. So as I mentioned, 12 is the minimum number of credits to be a full-time student. I would say most of our students tend to do something around 15. And again, you're going to see a little bit of variation there between some of those applied classes like labs or instruments, that sort of thing. So you might see a little bit of variation, but in general, students tend to rotate around 15 credit hours. So maybe five classes. I really encourage students to be very gentle with themselves in their first semester in college. They have a million transitions going on. Chances are they're living in a new place, living with new people, adjusting to being away from home, maybe for the first time. Again, there's lots of things going on for students. And so I really encourage students to be gentle with themselves as part of this process. We have some students that are, just go-getters and they want to register for all the things right off the bat. And while, yes, you do need to take some classes and that sort of thing, I really want students to be gentle with themselves in that first semester schedule. It's typically the hardest for students academically. And so I really want students to kind of pace themselves and be gentle and know that that's normal. There's a million things happening for students in that first semester. And we really do want students to kind of ease in so they can get the full college experience.
I think that's wonderful advice for families to take note of as they're supporting their student through the course registration process. Definitely.
Yep.
So I have a couple questions here that are kind of similar, and I'll let you tie them together, Shelley.
Okay.
Is there a first-year seminar, common reading, or other academic requirement for first-year students? And are there core required classes for first-year students?
These are all great questions. So we do have in our first year, we ask all of our students to take a COLL 150, which is a course that really so the topics are going to look very different. The topics are kind of all over the board with COLL 150s, which makes it really fun. But really helps students to hone in on their writing skills, right? So regardless of a student's major at William and Mary, they're going to need to have really strong writing skills. So the College 150 class, or COLL 150 as we call it for short, really encourages students to focus specifically on their writing skills and writing ability. We also have a COLL 100, and that focuses on non-written communication. So talking about oral communication and presentations and those sorts of things. So both the COLL 100 and the COLL 150 students are strongly encouraged to take in their first year. Again, because we consider the skills, not necessarily the topics that they're learning, because the topics are varied, but the skills that they're learning in those classes to be essential to success in their future major. So we do want students to take their COLL 100 and their COLL 150 in their first year. The other thing that I want to make sure to put a plug in for is our foreign language proficiency. So William & Mary does have a foreign language proficiency where students need to have up to an intermediate proficiency level in a foreign language. Now, for the vast majority of our students, they will have met that requirement by taking 4 years of the same language in high school. So if your student took 4 years of French in high school, that satisfies our foreign language proficiency requirement. For students that haven't completed that, did not complete that in high school, there is a foreign language proficiency requirement at William and Mary. And it's a timing issue is why I'm bringing this up. So for a student that's starting with a new language to meet that proficiency requirement, that can take up to 2 years, 4 semesters for a student to complete that. So they would be taking 101 in the fall, 102 in the spring, 201 the following fall, and 202 the following spring. So that's something, and we talk to students about this regularly, but just kind of be on the family's radar as well. If they do need to complete the foreign language proficiency, we really want them to get started on that in their first semester to make sure they make timely progress to complete it. So yes, 100 to 150 students will take those in their first year. And then if they need the foreign language proficiency requirement, we would want them to start on that their first year as well.
I've also posted in the chat here a link to an explanation of the college curriculum, which will give you an overview of that curriculum and a breakdown of each of some of those requirements that Shelley just mentioned. It might be a good idea to spend some time with that if you have questions about the curriculum that students will be engaging in while they're at William and Mary. Mm-hmm. Let's see here. The Monroe Scholar Program mentioned that Monroe Scholars have access to priority registration. How does that work?
Sure. So when students are in college studies, one of the things that we teach them how to do is how to identify their specific registration windows. That information is all posted in our student system. But we do teach students how to do that. So yes, so for groups like the Monroes that do have a priority registration window, we will teach them in college studies how to identify that in the system because there is some variation there.
If my student has not gotten an email to match with a faculty advisor, what should they do?
They shouldn't be getting any emails about faculty advising yet. So they won't receive an email from their faculty advisor until orientation. We're actually working on the matching process right now. So we take the information that students give us in the new student inventory, and then we do a similar type of survey to our faculty. And then we have an algorithm that was written by William and Mary math students to match up our incoming students with faculty. And so once we get to orientation in August, then they will receive an email from their faculty advisor, but they won't receive anything before then.
Okay. So do students need to send final copies of their high school transcripts and request AP scores to be sent to the registrar themselves?
Yes. And so typically admissions will reach out to students if they haven't received the final transcripts. Admissions isn't going to reach out about AP scores just because that's not part of their purview. But admissions will reach out if they are missing final transcripts. And again, all of that information would be sent to the registrar's office for evaluation. The other thing I want to share too, especially about AP scores, I don't know specifically for this year. I'll be honest, I haven't kept up like I normally have with such an abnormal year. in normal years, we typically get AP scores around the 4th of July holiday. Again, I haven't been keeping track this particular year to know if that has changed at all. But in normal years, we typically get AP scores around the 4th of July holiday.
Okay. If June 28th through July 9th is the freshman window for registering, are the class slots for call first come, first served, meaning it would be better to register at the top of the window?
So the registration windows, again, vary for students. And when they're in college studies, one of the modules is teaching students how to identify their registration window. So I want to make sure students actually check banner to confirm their registration window and dates there. I'm sorry, what was the second part of that?
The second part of that was, would it mean it would be better to register at the top of the registration window?
So I always I don't want to create panic. I just recommend once a student identifies what their registration window is, that they register as soon as they can within that window. And again, recognize things will change. Students will add and drop, things will become available. But I do recommend students register as soon as they can when their window opens. The other thing to kind of tuck away is that obviously when we post times, we're based in Virginia, right? So we're talking about Eastern time. So for our students and families in different time zones, I'm sure you're already comfortable making those calculations in your head to adjust to the time zone, but just another thing to keep in mind.
Okay. That's a really helpful tidbit of information about the time zone change, something to keep in mind for sure. So I'm seeing a couple questions in the Q&A about how do students find out what professors to take or classes to take? Like, is this professor like really difficult? Like, we know that students do some of that networking. So how do you find that traditionally happens?
Sure. So that's for me, I think that's the great piece about college studies being taught by our students, on our current students, right? So our online short course college studies is taught by current undergrads, current student leaders. So they have really great insight and love to talk to students about all of those pieces. Excuse me. And that's what they're there for. They're there to help students not only move through the online short course, but also to help them with that first registration window. So kind of tapping into that immediate network, right? That's for a lot of our incoming students, that's their first student contact is with their peer advisor. So please take advantage of that. Now, once a student gets to campus for orientation, they're going to meet even more students, right? They're going to have their student orientation leaders that they can also talk to and get ask questions and things like that. So through these student leaders that your student will meet as part of their kind of onboarding process, they'll start to create that network of students to ask questions.
Wonderful. We have a lot of questions about language proficiency floating out there that I think are kind of specific. I think they're a little specific to individual students. And so I do want to make sure that we're using our time really effectively today, but I do want to provide some information about where can students go to learn more about their language proficiency and what courses they might need to take. Is there a good contact for them?
Sure. Yeah. So I posted a link in the chat. That takes you to the page that explains the foreign language proficiency requirement. So that spells out the different ways a student can complete the foreign language proficiency. I will say this is also spelled out in great detail in college studies. So students, as they work through college studies, will get even more information about this foreign language proficiency requirement. In a typical year, about 70% of our incoming students have met the foreign language proficiency requirement by the time they get here because they've taken 4 years of a language in high school. So it's really a small subset of our students that this impacts. But for that smaller subset of our students, it can create a really big impact if we don't talk to them about it early. So for our transfer students, we did send them all an email earlier this month explaining a little bit more about the process. And we'll do something similar for our freshmen in July. We want them to get into college studies first, but once they get in there, we'll also follow up with more information. So just something, I don't mean to cause any sort of panic, just want to make sure it's on folks' radar. Again, small subset of students that this impacts, but for those students, we really just want to make sure they get started early.
Definitely. Okay. Can you clarify what banner is? That's a great question.
Oh, that's a loaded question. Yes.
That
So
is a
banner,
loaded question.
yeah. So banner is what we call our or is the product name for our student information system. So that's the system where student records are kept. That's the system they use to register for courses. Everything's in there. So you'll hear folks talk about banner and the banner system, and that's what we're talking about is our student information system. So students will log in to that through their my.wm.edu site is how they can log into banner that way. But that's, yeah, banner does a lot for us, but that's our student information system.
Fabulous answer, Shelley. It's a difficult system to explain.
Well, I'll explain it. Everything, it's everything.
So we have someone here saying, I'm looking at the class schedule for COLL and it doesn't list the classes. Do we need to look at the catalog for specific courses?
So when you're looking at the open course list, so when I say a student needs to register for a COLL 150, what you need to look at is the attribute for COLL 150, because COLL 150s can be taught in any discipline. It can be biology, chemistry, art history. It can be across the board. So when you're looking at that open course list, check the attributes for COLL 150 and then search. And then you're going to see all of the courses that fulfill the COLL 150 requirement. The other note about open course list is it always defaults to the semester that we're in. And technically we're in our summer academic sessions right now. So it's going to default to summer 2021. So you'll need to first change the semester, the term, excuse me, to fall 2021, and then select attribute COLL 150, and then you'll see all the COLL 150s that will be offered this fall.
Fabulous. Does the advisor a student gets during orientation stay with the student throughout their time at William & Mary, or do they get a different advisor after declaring a major?
So the way our model works is all of our students come in undeclared, and they work with a faculty advisor during that kind of initial pre-major period. So before they've declared their major. William & Mary is very intentional about trying to have students hold off on declaring their major because we want them to do some exploration first. We want them to take some of their COLL classes. We want them to maybe explore some subjects they haven't had an opportunity before they settle on a major. So it's very intentional. For most students in their sophomore year is when they will declare their major. And when they declare their major, they will, as part of that declaration process, identify a new major faculty advisor. If a student decides to double major, then they will have two major advisors, one per major. And then if they have a major and a minor, they'll have a major advisor and a minor advisor. So yes, they'll stick with that pre-major advisor for the first year, maybe year and a half, and then they will transition to their major advisor. And again, the professional advisors in our office are always available to assist students as well.
Okay. Is your assigned peer advisor in your anticipated major?
No, we don't know that yet. So just the timeline of when all of this is happening, we don't have access to that information when we're doing this. So we recruit peer advisors from all around the institution. So all different majors, all different disciplines. So they come from a great kind of cross section of the institution, but no, they're not matched based off of major interest. No.
I thought that was a great follow-up question to information about declaring a major.
Mm-hmm.
We really do allow students to explore a little bit before they declare their major, and really assigning them a peer advisor from a different major could be a helpful way for them to do a little bit of exploration and learn about a different interest area. Yep. For sure.
And sometimes that happens with faculty advisors too, right? What a student indicates to us in May can change by August. And so they might have been matched based off of that May interest. But there's some opportunities to learn and ask questions and grow from that faculty advisor as well.
Okay. Did I understand it correctly that any outcome from the meeting with the faculty advisor can influence the class's registration only during the add drop period?
So again, it's kind of just a timing thing. So a student won't meet with their faculty advisor until the Monday of orientation. And then Monday night is the last window that our incoming students have all just to themselves to complete their course registration. And so, yeah, sometimes students will talk to their faculty advisor and realize they want to drop the courses they added in the summer and build a whole new schedule Monday night, right? There's lots of variation that can happen there. So potentially based off of the timing, a student might completely change what they've already registered for, or keep what they have and just add a couple more classes. And that's part of why we only have students register for some of their classes in the summer, because we want them to meet with their advisor before building their full schedule. So yeah, maybe they do drop everything they registered for this summer based off of those conversations.
Wonderful. So we only have a couple more minutes left with Shelley, and I see we have a few open questions still. So if we aren't able to get to your question today, please send us an email at families@wm.edu. We're helpful. We are more than happy to point you in the right direction. So Shelley, I kind of want to close this out with, we've covered a lot of information, some of it specific, some of it general. What are, from this point in the summer, the next steps and things that families can do to support their students as they prepare for some of these college studies, course registration, different components of their transition?
Yeah. So I think a couple of things. Make sure your student is referring to their tribe guide checklist, because that keeps all of those dates in place, right? And I know families have a lot of things going on right now. I know for where we live in Williamsburg, this weekend is graduation for our high school students, right? So we understand and recognize that families have a lot going on right now. And so kind of referring back to the tribe guide checklist is going to be really helpful. So make sure that your student is checking that. Also make sure your student is checking their email. Like I mentioned, that's how our office reaches out to students. That's how their peer advisor is going to reach out to them. So making sure that your student is checking their William and Mary email regularly. The other thing that I think can be really helpful, like I mentioned earlier, is just helping to manage expectations with our incoming students. It takes time to build a schedule. Chances are it's not going to be perfect the first time they register. When students are in college studies, we ask them to pick up to, when we talk about COLL 150 as an example, we ask students to pick up to 5. What are 5 COLL 150 courses that you would be interested in? Again, we just want students to start to build something, recognizing that might not be the final thing, just start to build something. So managing expectations is a big part of that. I also, Heather, I saw someone posted in the chat about course list showing closed classes. That's because we're holding them for incoming students. So if you see things that are closed that are, that's because we are holding classes specifically for our incoming students. So it's intentional. In some years, we've had instances where it says closed all the way up until an hour before registration opens, because that's when the registrar's team has time to make those updates. Again, it all happens, but just kind of be aware that some things might say closed now, and by the time your registration window opens, they're open, because we want to make sure that our incoming students have access to the seats and courses that they need. So managing expectations, again, is really, really important, and something that we can really use help with from our families. Just it takes time. It'll all happen, right? We will make sure students have access to the courses that they need to make timely progress. It might not be exactly what they want, but it will be what they need to make progress towards their degree. And so just kind of helping students be patient with the process is really helpful on our end to make sure that we're guiding students the right way.
Wonderful. I want to reiterate a couple things that you mentioned there at the end, that the Tribe Guide checklist really is going to be your students' one-stop shop to walk them through all of these specifics. If they are an incoming first-year student class of 2025, that information in college studies is going to be coming available part 1 on the 28th, I believe is that date.
Mhm.
And so we aren't there yet. So if you sat through this session and you start to feel maybe a little anxious or a little overwhelmed, like, are you one step behind? Don't worry, you are not one step behind.
You're ahead.
You are ahead. We did this intentionally to be a little bit ahead so you could use this as a resource if you need to come back and reference this call because it was recorded. And I would just encourage you to ask open-ended questions to your students to get an indication of how prepared are they feeling about this as they're approaching college studies. It would be my guess that they're checking their email and they're up to date on things and they know what's going on, but they may not be communicating to you that they know what's going on.
Yes.
So ask
we
those
see that happen.
open-ended.
Yes.
Yes, we see that happen with a myriad of things. So I would just suggest that you ask some open-ended questions. Hey, how are you feeling about college studies? How are you doing with reviewing financial aid? Is there anything that we need to sit down and have a conversation with? Can I help you through this process? And really get a sense of where they're at and how they're feeling, because they may be feeling a little bit overwhelmed, or they may be feeling like they have everything ready to go, but they have not communicated that to you, which is an important piece of the puzzle. So I want to say thank you again to Shelley for joining us and providing some really helpful information. Like I mentioned, the session was recorded and it'll be uploaded to our YouTube channel very shortly. It's been a pleasure meeting so many of you at our new student and family welcome events. We have our last 2 this evening. So if you're joining us, I'll see you in about an hour. And so thank you again for joining us. And I hope you can join us for our next Family Friday session on June 25th, where we'll be talking about meal plans and more. Thank you again, everyone, and have a fabulous weekend. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.